Hello and welcome to an exciting first episode of Money Talks. I am your host, Michael Thomas, and I am super excited to introduce our very first guest, Mr. Joe DeFelice. He is the Regional Administrator for Region 3 for the Department of Housing and Urban Development that we know and love so well and call HUD. We are very excited to have him here. He's got some great information, and let's say hello to Joe.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me. I'm pretty excited. A lot going on. I think this is a great conversation to have, especially hopefully coming out of COVID and getting, the economy started back up again. I think it's a perfect opportunity to have this conversation.
That's great. That's fantastic. So, Joe, just for the benefit of our viewers, could you just share a little bit about what does a regional administrator do? And I know you're in Region 3 on the East Coast, Mid-Atlantic. Just give us an idea of what kind of work you do for HUD.
Yeah, so I was appointed by President Trump in May of 2017 to oversee Region 3, which is Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia. In those states, I have 7 field offices: Pittsburgh, Charleston, Richmond, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Wilmington, and Philadelphia. So I oversee the day-to-day comings of those field offices. We have plenty of programs in those offices, from public housing to multifamily housing to single-family housing, FHA mortgages, to fair housing, equal opportunity, as well as community planning and development, which covers our community development block grant program. So we have the housing side, we have the urban development side. I actually come from the urban development side. I ran a community development corporation in Northeast Philadelphia for years, started a business improvement district, worked at the civic association level, did some moderate housing rehabs, market rate, essentially transitioning back from. So when I came to HUD, the public housing side was a little new to me, but I picked it up pretty quickly.
That's great. Yeah, that's a pretty complex area to pick up quickly. So good for you on that. I wanted to just ask too, to confirm, it sounds like you've got so many different divisions that you're overseeing and responsible for. Is it fair to say that you take concerns or you take items that you want to address and then you correspond directly with Washington headquarters?
On a regular basis, yeah. So we're in the Office of Field Policy and Management. We sit under the Deputy Secretary. As a matter of fact, last summer, for 2 months, I was elevated to acting Assistant Deputy Secretary. I just didn't want to move to D.C., so I wasn't willing to do the job full time, where I oversaw all 57 HUD field offices in the country. There's 10 regional administrators. I was one of them, so I oversaw myself and my 9 counterparts throughout the region. We are essentially the Secretary Carson's representative in the field. If he can't be there, we go. We do a lot of intake. We deal with mayors, county commissioners, U.S. senators, congressmen, governors, you name it. I mean, that's the contact that we have on the ground level. It's a way, and because let's face it, all HUD services are delivered in the field, and we feel that it's our job to meet with our local partners to find out what's working, what's not working, and kind of talk back up to Washington about these types of things.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. And that's actually a really great segue into what I want to ask you next. You mentioned senators and sort of local politicians, national. We want to talk about on this episode opportunity zones, something that I know you're very active in, speaking to another regional administrator and then seeing a presentation where, you're kind of approaching, I guess, 766 was the number I saw of designated opportunity zones within Region 3, which is quite a lot. And that program, the Opportunity Zone, is a federal program that provides tax incentives, but the zones were determined by governors across all the different states. And some states have other incentives that they pair with them. So tell me a bit about your work and what you're seeing in opportunity zones in Region 3.
All right. So first and foremost, they're not government programs. And I'm not being cute. The reason why is people need to understand they are tax incentives, right? There's no funding coming from the government for this. So they are tax incentives. It's a way. This all came out of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, established the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council, which is 17 federal agencies and 3 regional partners. My boss, Secretary Carson, sits at the head of head of that council. Scott Turner is the executive director of that council. So one thing that I pride myself on in my role is traveling my region extensively. I visited 190 counties in 3 years. And we do that so that, to kind of go back to what I said earlier, is so that we can hear from the residents. It's not my job as the federal government to come down and dictate to local municipalities and local partners how to do their job. Frankly, it's the opposite. It's up to them to tell me, to tell Washington how to do their jobs. And I think that's what makes these programs so beautiful. This isn't a government mandate coming down from the federal government. These are local people participating in their own communities. So, for example, I've traveled this region extensively. I've seen opportunity zones in Erie and in Bellefonte and Tamaqua, Pennsylvania, and Williamson, West Virginia, and Norfolk and Newport News, in Baltimore, Maryland, and Wilmington, Delaware. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I saw in Wilmington, Delaware. Second Chances Farm was the brainchild of a guy by the name of Ajit George. Ajit calls himself a compassionate conservative capitalist. Ajit had started a qualified opportunity zone fund and took a blighted vacant warehouse that sits on the edge of a public housing facility and converted that into an indoor urban farm. Here's the beauty of it. He hires only ex-offenders, pays them $32,000 a year with benefits, with a 10-year plan to sell the company to them. So it's having social impact. It's eliminating blight. It's having social impact. And he wants to make money. Secretary Carson got beat up a little bit because he said, rich people are going to get rich. Well, rich people are going to get rich. But the beauty of this program, the beauty of this incentive, the beauty of this incentive is essentially taking those dollars and steering them to communities that have received disinvestment for generations and decades. So that's the beauty. So what Ajit is doing there is just one example. Another beautiful example of what I've seen who's really taken this thing by storm is Erie, Pennsylvania. When you think of where to donate money, Erie is not the first place that comes to mind. But frankly, Erie, Pennsylvania, and Birmingham, Alabama ran with this from the beginning. So whether it was John Persinger or Matt and Tim Wachter, the work that they're doing in Erie has been really second to none. And here's the problem. And I was in McKeesport, Pennsylvania yesterday doing a roundtable with the mayor and the state senator and some local officials. And I said, listen, you've got to tell your story because no one else is going to tell your story. And that's what Erie did so beautifully. They went out and told their story and people started believing it. Believe in Erie, believe in Erie. They started a $50 million qualified opportunity fund. They've probably somewhere between $800 and $900 million in private investment going into Erie. They're starting a culinary arts district. The thing about Erie is people don't realize this. The nation's poorest zip code exists in downtown Erie. They're revitalizing that with a culinary arts district, and they've really become the leaders nationwide in the opportunity zone movement.
That's fantastic. That's a great success story. And I appreciate that distinction between, a government program and a government incentive to incentivize investment in the form of a capital gains, tax deferral, if you will, that starts off for the benefit of our viewers at 5%, and then it goes to 10 up to 15%. Now, when it first was enacted, this is a question for you, Joe. When it was first enacted, the maximum benefit was after you'd held this opportunity zone fund for 10 years. Beyond that, you could then, make, tax-free money beyond that. But then, unfortunately, the 10-year time horizon started ticking, right away. Has that changed at all? I haven't really seen anything new on that.
I think you're using things a little bit. So the way that it worked is once it started, if you put money in, so I have capital gains, right? So let's walk back a little bit so for maybe people don't understand. I have capital gains. I don't know what to do with those dollars. I can just write a check and send my tax to Washington, which is funny. Right. As a federal official, I'm telling people not to send that money to Washington. I'm telling them to take those dollars, reinvest them into their own communities where you can make change and have a positive impact. But the bottom line here is, let's say I start a qualified opportunity zone fund. I have $1 million in capital gains. I decided to put it into this fund. So if I would have done this, say, a year and a half ago, if I had 10 years, I would have gotten a 15%. I would have been able to defer that tax, whatever I would have owed on that million, for 10 years and got a 15% decrease, right? So I'd only have to pay 85% of the tax as opposed. And the good thing about that money is probably going to appreciate over those 10 years no matter what. So that 15% could anywhere be like 25, 30%.
Sure.
What you were talking about is, so we've passed that point. So now we're into the 7-year part. 7 years or more, you get 10% decrease. So you no longer get the 15% decrease. You still get the 10% decrease. But you have to keep it in for 10 years. Once you keep it in for 10 years, any money you make on top of that is tax-free. So if I put $1 million in, I keep it in for 10 years. I will have to wait 10 years before I even have to pay the tax on that million. It'll be deferred, so it'll probably accrue interest and cost. But at the same time, I will get a 10% decrease in what I owe. And let's say I made $9 million. That $9 million that I make is tax-free. That's the beauty of the program. It's really incentivizing people to help their money grow by providing positive impact in communities.
That's great. So that hasn't sunset yet, the maximum benefit. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, and I believe that's through 2045, if I'm correct.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I'd heard, at conferences going to, hear this topic when it was first coming out, and Novogradac was very excited about it. A lot of, multifamily conferences were talking about this. And one of the things that was described was it could be as productive as the low-income housing tax credit was during tax reform in 1986. That low-income housing tax credit is also a tax credit to incentivize investors to put money into affordable housing development in communities. So that program, HUD reports, is around $8 billion in incentive a year. I've heard, if the opportunity zones are leveraged correctly, it could be a lot bigger than that. I mean, do you see that as a possibility?
Totally, a lot bigger than that, because you're talking about two completely different things, right? Low-income housing tax credit is to do one thing, right? That's to build low-income housing. With this, you can build affordable housing, you can build market rate housing, senior housing, veterans housing, you name it. And you can also invest in businesses, right? So there's all different kinds of ways to make this money grow. And you're not relying on someone buying the credits to give you the funding and being awarded from the state. Like, if you want to do this, you can do it. You don't have to worry about Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency deciding that they like your project. And I love the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. Let me just say that. But deciding on your project versus somebody else's, especially on the 9% versus the 4%, so they're a lot more competitive. But with respect to opportunity zones, so many other things go into them rather than just the investment. And let me talk to you a little bit about why this would be important for these areas, right? So the one thing that we've done here is we've taken the cue from Secretary Carson and the leadership at the White House Opportunity Revitalization Council, and I've pulled in all of my counterparts in this region. Michelle Christian from the Department of Labor, Kirk Cocodrilli from USDA, and I'm not going to go through all their names, Cosmo Cervidio from EPA, Matt Baker from HHS. These are all the same regional administrators across the board. Linda Cruz-Carnell from EDA, Joyce Haas from General Services Administration, to talk about what our agencies have to offer. So out of these 17 agencies and 3 regional partners, every one of them has a certain amount of grants, competitive grants. 217 competitive grants are now giving preference points to projects located in opportunity zones, right? So if I want to do a Main Street project, there's a Hope 6 Main Street project through HUD, where essentially says if I want to redo an entire block that's commercial on the bottom, maybe unused commercial on top, if I commit to doing affordable housing on the 2nd and 3rd floors, there's grants for that. If you're located in an opportunity zone, you will get a bump up. You will get preference points over others that aren't. There's 217 of these that run varied Department of Justice, USDA, you name it, across the board. So we've kind of become a traveling roadshow. We were just in Scranton, Pennsylvania last week. We've been in Erie. We've been out in Pittsburgh. We held four different roundtables in Philadelphia last summer on this particular issue. Right now, of those 217, 25 are live. So if you go to grants.gov and click opportunity zones, it'll show you all the opportunity zone, all the grants with preference points to opportunity zone. So that's why I think you're going to be a little bit different than LIHTC. And look, LIHTC's been great. I mean, when they originally kind of pulled private activity bonds out of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. We heard it as regional administrators being out in the field, like, you have to get that back in there. We told the secretary, we told the deputy secretary. Thankfully, they put that back in there, and it's really kind of created. This is just, it's different because you can invest in businesses. It doesn't necessarily have to be affordable housing. But what you're also doing is it's job creation, right? There's a ton of regular job creation associated. Anything from service jobs to construction jobs. I mean, electricians, plumbers, cement masons, you name it. If we're building, they're working. And I think that's
right.
kind of it's kind of whole. It's not just about housing people. Look, that's the one thing we talk about at HUD, Secretary Carson. It's about the pushing for self-sufficiency. We can build housing 40 years, tear that housing and build new housing. But if we start investing in our people, then the housing just comes a little bit more naturally. People talk about affordable housing, and there is and we all understand there is an affordable housing issue in this country. But the mindset is that we can have people self-sufficient to be able to rent or buy their own homes. housing just becomes more affordable because people can afford it if they're working.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. And, I think they do go hand in glove, especially when you look at the distressed regions where opportunity zones were created. You could build housing out there, but there might not be anything else or much of anything else. So
Yeah.
sounds like the opportunity zone, you could take more of a, a whole community based approach, right?
And
Where
that's
not just mixed use, but I mean, totally other businesses.
that's the plan. And one of the things, when I was in Philadelphia, one of the things I keep hearing about is gentrification, right? People talk about. So what I told those community leaders is, well, you don't have to sit by the side and hope that developers come in and do the right thing. Start your own fund. You can start your own fund. Go out and solicit investors and come up with your own plan about what you want to do. I don't need to have $1 million in capital gains to start a fund. I just need to be able to go find those people that have $1 million in capital gain. So, it's like sometimes it's shooting fish in a barrel. Like I said to West Philadelphia, you have several prominent people that grew up in West Philadelphia. I won't name names on here, but basketball players and rap singers and professors and the like, people that have, from these communities that went out in the world and they made a ton of wealth. You pitch to them. This is an opportunity for them to give back into their community and have an impact and make some money too. I feel like it's a no-brainer, and I've been going around the region, or say the country, the region, really trying to tell this story, because we need to. For example, when I was in Erie, they held an Erie homecoming where they brought in 200 investors. They brought in Secretary Carson. They brought in people from all over the country to talk about Erie. Ran into Billy Blanks. You might not know that name, but I don't know if you remember Tybo, the Tybo videos.
Oh yeah, of course. Yep.
Billy Blanks is a native Erie. He came to that meeting knowing nothing about opportunity zones. He's like, wait a second, I got some capital gains. He decided to invest right there on the spot. He didn't even know it existed, but he has that celebrity nature, someone that went from their town, made something of themselves, and now they're coming back. And if we can tell that Billy Blanks story over and over and over again, we have a professional football player, name's escaping right now, putting money into Coatesville, Pennsylvania. I think it might have been Rip Hamilton, putting money back. Yep. He's a basketball player, but putting money back into Coatesville. So we need to be able to pitch and tell that story and have like local leadership be at the forefront, because anyone can really start these zones. Not the zones, the funds.
The funds, right? So let me ask you this. I love your thinking, and I think that way too about whether it's high net worth people or it's companies that have a lot of cash. I mean, Apple's got enough money to run without selling another product for some amount of years, right? I mean, that's how much cash they actually have in reserves. In places like San Francisco or more tech-heavy places where they are so flush with cash, particularly now, have you checked out where those map out to? I mean, is that feasible for them to do things that benefit their workforce in those regions?
So you're specifically talking about workforce housing. Yeah. So one of the things, and I see it. I have Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia in my region. My counterparts have New York. I don't see it as much in the Philly region or Baltimore as much, but I definitely see it in D.C. where, police and firemen can't even live in the city because they don't make enough money to be able to afford. So the one thing that we're looking at, so Secretary Carson, the two things that last year he started his bus tour, which was the Driving Affordable Housing bus tour, about eliminating regulatory barriers. One of the issues that we get into all the time at the federal government is we constantly layer regulatory barrier over regulatory barrier on each other, on people. So it costs more money because if you have to then hire consultants and you need to hire administrative staff to do those types of things, then we end up with certain issues. So that's the one thing that we've been really pushing. If we can start eliminating some of these regulatory barriers, we can make housing more affordable just because of that. I mean, I look at cost sometimes just to build public housing, and I'm shocked, and I'm not going to say it on here, but I'm shocked at the numbers sometimes it costs to build public housing. And I spoke to a developer in Philadelphia, and he said one of the issues that he runs into is, he goes, he builds public housing, and I'm just going to throw a number out there, for $300,000. Turns the key, it's worth $150,000. He said, I'm a private developer. If I build something for $300,000, I turn the key, it's worth $800,000.
Right.
Therein lies the problem. And he said one of the main reasons, you have local ordinances, you have state ordinances, things are just layered on top and things like that. One thing that we're doing, and I spoke a little bit about police and fire, is a program that we do have at HUD that really nobody knows about when I try to talk about it. It's called the Good Neighbor Next Door program. It's for teachers, EMTs, police officers, firemen. Essentially, if they decide that they want to live in a neighborhood, they can buy a HUD house for 50% of the cost. They just have to commit to living there 5 years.
Great.
So that's a beautiful program. I spoke to the Philadelphia Fraternal Order of Police about it, a couple months back. I said, this is something you should really put your members, put your team in the community, but they're able to find it. That's one of the issues that we do see, and you're going to see it. I mean, it's tough in Seattle and San Francisco, Boston, New York, greater DC area. So I think the more regulatory barriers we can remove, the more affordable we can make housing. On the flip side, I think one of our jobs should be what I talked about previously, isn't just making the housing more affordable, but putting people in a position where they can afford. The one thing that we do here at HUD is we have a Section 3 program. It's part of Section, and let me know if I'm going on too long.
No,
it's
that's great.
Section 3 of the Fair Housing Act. So essentially what Section 3 says, if we're putting HUD dollars somewhere, 30% of the workforce should come from that community. The mindset is we're investing in this goes back to investing in our people. And I'm not talking about dustpan and brush jobs. Hey, give a guy a dustpan and brush job, cut him loose, give another guy a dustpan and brush. At the end of the week, I created 5 new jobs. No, career-driven jobs. It could be anything from social media to bookkeeping to landscaping, all the way up to electrical and plumbing. And the mindset will be, and there's sweat equity, right? Bidding sweat equity. But the mindset is getting people up and out of housing. We don't look at public housing as I don't think it was ever intended to be generational. 2, 3, 4 generations living. The mindset is going to be, it's a quick hand up and move on so we can get somebody else that truly needs it. And we will help you graduate, whether it's through the Section 3 program, through our family self-sufficiency program, through our resident opportunity for self-sufficiency program, giving those wraparound services to people that may not have had that guidance. Foster Youth Initiative is another one. We just came out with the Foster Youth Initiative a year ago, Secretary Carson. And the beauty of that program is I never thought about it. I graduated high school, I came home. I went to college, I came home. I went to law school, I came home. These kids are 18 years old, and all of a sudden they age out of foster care. And prior to last year, people just went, all right, well, good luck to you. So Secretary Carson has essentially put them on a 3-year program where they can get what they call FYI vouchers, foster youth to independence vouchers, so that they can get on their feet, that they can have that right service. And then we can help them move up and out of public housing so we can free up some of the backlog. I don't know if that directly answered it, but I think we kind of encompassed it.
No, I love it. It's a paradigm shift that I think is needed, because it's taking an approach of mixed income, mixed income levels, and moving people. The idea is to move people up the bands of income, right? Not to keep them stuck at a certain level. So I think that's brilliant. The challenge I think that I've seen in workforce housing, like you were mentioning with cops and teachers and all that, and I think I want you to confirm or give me your thoughts on this, but with the opportunity zones could be like a perfect match, because the challenge with having, let's say, something that has lower rents that would meet, salaries of those individuals in those markets is that you're kind of cutting some potential, I guess, away from the investor. And one of the agencies a year ago tried this program like this, and they found, it was Fannie or Freddie, I can't remember which one, but they had done this sort of mezzanine program where if you did, 80% of AMI, but it had to be 10% below market for a certain period of time. And it just didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is the investors didn't have enough of an incentive. But do you think that this opportunity zone could now be enough of an incentive for someone to do workforce housing?
And I can give you a prime example of that. Well, again, back to Wilmington, Delaware. Gray Fox, I think it's Gray Fox Capital, is doing just that. They're creating affordable housing. The problem is, look, these zones are set up for people to be able to interest them. What would interest them? Making money would interest them, right? So most people are going to look at it and say, well, if I can get market rate or versus I can get, affordable, well, I'm going to make a ton more money on market rate. The problem with that is there was nothing being built there prior to. So now you're seeing a whole new level of stuff being built. But you need those people that are interested in making that social impact. That's why I believe cities and local leaders need to be at the table. So Gray Fox is doing just that. But they were originally at the time the only qualified out. They were the first quality opportunity zone fund, qualified opportunity zone fund in Wilmington, in Delaware. And what they started doing is they are actually doing what you just talked about. They are building that 60% AMI housing. And they've realized they're probably cutting off their nose to spite their face to a certain extent, but they know that they're going to make some money, but at the end of the day, they're going to have that social impact. And having that social impact is going to be able to, what's that saying? A rising tide lifts all boats. That's the
Right.
mindset. Have that social impact, put people into affordable housing, and kind of raise them up so that we can help out and then freeze up the backlog everywhere else. So it is being done, but you need to have the people. And that's why I think it's so important to have what we call that community quarterback, that local person that has that drive and that can go out there. Because a lot of times we don't even know, sometimes zones are happening and we don't know because there's no reporting requirement. So we need to find out who they are. So that's why we've worked, the city of Philadelphia, they took their Amazon website. When they didn't get Amazon, they retooled it towards opportunity zones to show all the investments that investors have. And it was a good way for them to help capture who these investors are and who these developers are that are doing some of the work. So now they can open up a dialogue about what is really needed in their community. And maybe there's trade-offs or whatnot.
Right. No, that's fantastic. Last question I want to ask you is, I was reading about in Virginia Beach, which I grew up going to because I grew up in Virginia. There was a multifamily development that was in an opportunity zone, and I think it was around 260 units or so. And earlier this year, I did a hospital HUD 242 loan. It was the first ever done with the hospital group. And, it kind of happened after this memo came out and we realized we were going to get the incentive included in the hospital. And I'll tell you what, everybody at HUD was very excited about this. And so I was wondering, from your perspective, because you oversee all these different departments of HUD, did you see in the multifamily that there was an excitement in terms of the processing and wanting to make this happen because it wasn't an opportunity zone that kind of brought some more eyes to it, some more resources to it?
Well, I can tell you, they all bring my eyes to them on a regular basis. I mean, I have Google alerts for anything that's opportunity zone, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and I make sure that I'm putting that information. Of course it is. It's important because they're multifamily. Whenever we're building more housing, that's a positive thing, right? That's a positive thing. So if we can figure out ways to capitalize, so what we'll do a lot of times is we'll try to engage those developers and say, hey, we understand you're building. Let's let you know, these are some of the programs that we can wrap around here. For example, you're talking about, we just put out a Section 811 and a Section 202. Those numbers might not mean anything to you, but Section 811 is disabled housing. Section 202 is elderly housing. And what we were able to do was prioritize that, and with an opportunity zone grant, as I talked about, there's 217 federal grants, that if you're applying in an opportunity zone, you will get preference points. And we're continuing to try to do those types of things and getting that information out to the people that need to see it.
That's great. Yeah, I know we're in these strange times now, but I'll tell you, the capital markets, and with something like the opportunity zone, 221 D4 rates, the multifamily permanent construction loan with HUD, are like at 275 right now. I mean, that's fixed for 40 years. When are we ever going to see money like that available again? And if you pair it with an opportunity zone, even more of an upside.
It's funny, and just to circle back to kind of combine two of your thoughts. One of the issues too is we have, I don't know if you're familiar with the RAD program. It's called Rental Assistance Demonstration. So essentially RAD is essentially taking public housing, fixing it up and converted it to either private or nonprofit public housing, right? It's still receiving public dollars. It's just not going through the housing authority. So if you do a RAD where you could essentially get your tax credits, right? And you're doing it in an opportunity zone, you're guaranteed to get $100 a month more per unit.
Wow.
So let's say you have 100 units, right? That's 100 at 100 units, right? That's 10,000. That's $120,000 a year over the course of 10 years, 1.2 million over the course of 30 years. That's $3.6 million. So if you're worried about capital or you're worried about operating costs, because it's going to take money to tear down or rehab, so you're doing this full RAD, you can get your tax credit. And this is an incentive to do this in an opportunity zone. You can rebuild that RAD pretty much anywhere, but this is an opportunity for you to rebuild that RAD in an opportunity zone so that you can take advantage of those extra federal dollars, but at the same time using your LIHTC at the same time.
Yeah, and so on the RAD, I know enough to be dangerous about it. I'm certainly no RAD expert, but are you getting dollar for dollar credit on those existing units, or I know because you have the public housing, you get a credit on it, and I've been in touch with Miami-Dade County. I know a lot of the folks over there that are involved in Liberty Village, which is the largest RAD development in the country. And so, they're getting. Go ahead. Sorry.
What you'll lose the operating subsidy that would be attached to them, right? So, the housing authority, let's say a housing authority has 900 units. Now you're down to 800. Well, that's going to be prorated because you don't have to maintain the day-to-day. But the flip side, I think you're going to make so much money up on maintenance. I travel this region extensively, and I see so much housing that was built in the 40s. That's frankly, it's obsolete, and it's been obsolete for 40 years. It's not that it's just newly obsolete. It's been obsolete for a long, long time. So so I think where you may lose in some capital funds and operating subsidy, you're going to get, because that extra 100 probably, one, helps. Two, the maintenance and the upkeep costs are going to go way down compared to what you were doing before. I mean, a lot of people are just patching holes to the point that you can't get on a bullet wound anymore.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, energy efficiency has changed so much in the last 10 years alone. I mean, you're saving just incredible amounts on energy incentives. And as you know, HUD provides discounts if you're going green on the HUD multifamily loans too.
My house was built in 1965, right? I bought it 4 years ago. I moved in. I had the original air conditioner and original heater, right? My HVAC guy comes in. He goes, "Man, you're operating at about 50% right now." So literally, I was paying for 50% of my heat to go out the chimney. I replaced it last year. I'm now at 94%, right? So my bills have gone way down. I mean, it was initial upfront costs, right? Not on different tracks. Initial upfront cost to take out the old system and put in the new system, but my monthly savings have gone down exponentially. That this is going to, in about 4 years, I'm going to even out that cost, and then I'm only going to be in the red for about 4 more years on that heater, and then I'll be starting to go into the black. And I think that's the beauty of how RAD can work. And frankly, again, it also helps break up that government oversight and putting it back into the hands of private people, so you don't have this huge monopoly and bureaucratic red tape around things. You have, someone dealing with, maybe they only own 3 or 4 properties. Maybe they only one property. They don't own 700 properties.
Right. Yeah. No, I love anything that deals with preservation and keeping, housing, whether it's workforce or affordable, and revitalizing it. I mean, that's the idea behind, building new stuff, is like we got to keep the stuff that we have and fix it up and make it nicer and safer, healthier environmentally. There's all kinds of statistics on how health and housing are tied together. I'm sure you're aware of those too. And, health statistics go up when the area improves.
And we just put out a lead note for last week, Nova Notice of Funding Availability on lead, because that's a big issue. Secretary Carson was a brain surgeon, right? He was at Johns Hopkins. And he tells his story, and you can tell it kind of hurts him to tell the story, but he tells a story that he would get kids that come in to Johns Hopkins, and he was maybe doing brain surgery on or whatever, and they were coming from Baltimore. He didn't want to send them home. He's like, "Look, I had to order tests to keep them an extra day or two because I knew what they were going back to was not going to be a healthy environment." So we've really tried to wrap up that conversation. And I see it. Look, when a lot of this public housing was built in 1940, it was more mandated. So people said, "Well, we have to do it. Where are we going to put it? Oh, put it down by the refinery. Put it down by the river." So over time, we're beginning to experience that. I mean, especially what I see in the South, in the southern portion of Virginia, there's still segregated housing that lives to this day. I mean, it's no longer segregated de jure, right? But it's more de facto segregation, where essentially at the time they said, "We're going to build the African-American housing here in the city of Richmond, and we're going to build the interstates entirely around it. And then what we're going to do is we're not going to put a hospital, a school, or a grocery store in there." And then you're 40, 50 years later, and you wonder why gangs have risen and drug dealing has taken place. Well, because you've cut people off from opportunity, right? So we're still seeing the effects of a lot of that today. So while I do believe preservation, especially if things are historic, we do need to look to the future to find out where opportunities are.
Yeah, not concentrating poverty, which was kind of the old way of building these, what became known as the projects, right? Which HUD has gotten away from. And, a lot of the projects I'm involved in, or I've seen the communities, the light tech or workforce or what have you, I mean, are as nice as anything you've ever seen. I mean, and I like to point out too that HUD multifamily programs are not a government subsidy. I mean, it's a program through the government, but they're funded by private equity. They're funded by investors that want the government guarantee. They want the return on their dollars. And really, that's what makes the program so successful. So,
and the one thing that I have on a quick note, to go back to one of your points earlier, what I have seen that's working in the DC market. I haven't really I'm starting to see a little bit in Philly, but I don't think the prices have gotten there yet. I mean, you can still rent a 3-bedroom house in Philadelphia around that $1,000 number, whereas DC, forget about it. That's not happening. San Francisco, not happening. I mean, it might not be the best house, might not be in the best neighborhood, but you know, that $800 to $1,500 range, you can still get it. But what they've been doing in DC is really doing that mixed income housing. It really seems to be working well. I mean, you have 2 units side by side, one's subsidized, one's not. 2M is a property in Northeast Washington that did just that. I mean, they have probably 50% of some form of affordable housing in there, whether that's local tax credits or local vouchers, HUD vouchers, Section 8 versus project-based, and there's just also, rent restricted via AMI. But 50% of them are just private, and they went into that with that model, and it seems to be working really well. And one of the issues with that, and the Secretary Korzenga said, it's beautiful. Yoga studio, basketball court, movie room, pool deck. One of the issues, though, it's kind of like, okay, but is that where we see public housing? You want it to be respectable and everything else, but you also want to give people an incentive to get out, right? I mean, that could be the end goal. But at the meantime, I have seen it work in those places where you can't find that affordable housing.
Well, yeah, I mean, the regulatory burdens, the cost, which really, I mean, is driven a lot by the complexity. And I kind of joked with, a housing authority I was meeting with when Secretary Carson was elected. I'm like, well, it's not like what we're doing is brain surgery, but it's pretty close, right? I mean, this housing finance stuff gets way too complicated, especially when you're dealing with LIHTC and whatever. So love opportunity zones, love workforce housing, love what you're doing in Region 3. Was there anything else you wanted to mention or wrap up with?
No, I appreciate you having me. I think it's important. We need to continue to get this message out. We need to talk to our partners, the nonprofits that are worried about what's going to be built in their community. Become your own community quarterback. Go out and find those investors, and let's put this to work the way you want it to work. If you have complaints about the incentive, well, get involved, and that's the best way that I can see it doing. We're going to continue to do roundtables over the course of this year and into the future with local investors, local nonprofits, local faith-based groups, trying to get everybody at the table to figure out the way that this works. I just had this conversation, like I said, in McKeesport yesterday. We're going to bring our federal agencies out there, Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, bring our Newcastle, Pennsylvania, bring our federal agencies at the table, ask the local leadership to bring their people to the table, and we can talk about what works, and let's get these things moving because there's still plenty of time left.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I mean, we could really revitalize huge parts of our country with this incentive, clearly.
Totally agree.
Yeah, it's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a very busy guy. Joe DeFelice, we're so glad to have you on our very first edition of Money Talk. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Next time, keep up the great work, okay?
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to our first edition of Money Talks with Joe DeFelice, the Regional Administrator from Region 3 for HUD. What a great episode. Thanks again. I'm your host, Michael Thomas, signing off.